All right, so Professor Raphael, I don't know how familiar you are at all with what we do with this segment.
Not at all.
So it's basically an opportunity to sit down and hopefully have productive civil dialogues where we rationalize our position on perceived confrontational issues. The idea is to kind of disarm some hot button issues that people often yell about rather than talk about. And so today, this was by request actually from students at UT, as a topic of affirmative action, specifically as it relates to applications and acceptance on college campus. I believe that affirmative action as a policy is by definition racist. I think it's wrong, and I don't think that it's worked. But if you disagree with me, you're more than welcome to change my mind, Professor.
Well, initially I was curious about what this whole thing was. I don't feel it's racist, and not having as much information, I'm sure, as you do about it to be able to, I don't know, let's just say debate that.
You might have more being a black professor, more experience.
Yeah, my first thing is, by definition of affirmative action is to allocate resources to those who are underprivileged or have been discriminated against from the beginning.
Okay.
That's already a hint of racism, right?
Discrimination against people of anyone based on race is racism, yes.
So it starts with that.
Yes.
So to even the playing field, you allow those certain resources, so to speak, to be distributed to people who don't get them, and I think everybody across the board now gets a fair chance at something they're interested in.
Yeah, so I don't know that I agree with you in the sense that when I say racist, I mean it by definition. I showed this to someone else. I just want to make sure so that you don't think I'm being cute. I don't necessarily mean racially negative, but racial prejudice or discrimination, right? And so affirmative action, in responding, I agree with you, everything you just said, in responding to systemic racism, has now created a policy that is systemically racist, and that it specifically either includes people based on race or excludes people based on race. Notably, Asian Americans have been disproportionately affected by affirmative action negatively. I'm sure you're aware of the lawsuits that are happening at Harvard. So I understand where you're coming from, and I think that it's a virtuous goal to want to correct the wrongs of the past. I don't believe that the right way to do that is to then implement more systemic discrimination, whether it's against Asians, white Americans, Mexican, black Americans, whatever it is. And I also would argue that it has not been effective in achieving the results that it wants. So even if it's a virtuous goal, if we agreed that this idea of sort of, to use the term as someone used earlier, reverse discrimination now against other people with preferential treatment for black Americans, if we agree that that is morally correct, it still hasn't had net positive results. And in many ways, it's had net negative results for black Americans.
Right. I can't agree with that. And
you can or can't?
I can.
Oh, okay, very nice.
I agree with
okay, good.
that a little bit. And I have to go back to some basic run-of-the-mill statements. Two wrongs don't make a right. Right? But at the same time, man, there are, because I agree with what you said, it has not made a major difference.
Right.
It only benefit people, a certain percentage of people, which then still leaves a chunk of those people out. So it doesn't allow everybody that same kind of privilege, so to speak, right? What I wanted to say is, say you have someone who is, someone brought this up, they have some kind of disability. Right.
Like a physical disability or mental disability?
Yeah. And again, let's go back some. When I grew up, there was black and white. That was it. Right. People called you something out of your name. White people called black people something out of their name. It was racist. Now, I don't think, with all of the things that are across the board at this point, all the different groups, it's no longer racist. It's now what I would call xenophobia. People are afraid of something different. You understand? There's more than just, everybody has a preference, something that they do not like. It just so happens to be that the human being comes in different colors, shapes, and sizes. And so I
think that's true of some people, not all people. For example, I don't think you're afraid of me being white. and I'm not afraid of you being black. I should hope not.
That's because my character it says I'm not afraid of you.
Right.
But I've gone in places that created tension where I am afraid to be in a certain place, right? And not only because of what I look like, but because I might present an intimidating view. Right. And anyway,
what's interesting is what you just brought up is actually an argument that people often make for racially segregated schools. Because, for example, we see that sex-limited schools, like all-boys schools or all-girls schools, they perform much better. And the reason for that is because they don't feel uncomfortable either, not even necessarily being a minority. For a long time we assumed it was because black people are a minority and they felt uncomfortable around a lot of white people. But then we found out the same thing was true even if you had a pretty mixed student population, and people sort of being in an environment where they feel as though they don't have to worry about insensitivities, offending people, or this sort of xenophobic mindset as you've addressed, generate more positive outcomes in all boys or all girls schools. And so you have some racists who say, well, then we should just have segregated schools completely. And I know that that is not at all what you're advocating. It's not at all what I'm advocating. It's just interesting that we take something, and I think we both agree and say, fear of anyone based on race is bad. Racists say, because it's natural, we need to implement segregation. And that's what we've seen historically. And I think, this is in my opinion, a soft version of that is what we now know as affirmative action, because it is excluding people based on race. And I think that's wrong.
To get into a university, a prestigious university, let's just say here, Princeton.
Sure.
They expect a certain kind of student in place. If you can't deliver what the expectations of that university is, it doesn't work then. Right? Then I'm not going to allow you into my school because you don't have what it takes to be here.
Right.
Regardless.
And my issue with affirmative action is it's the opposite that's occurring now. They're saying you don't have what it takes to get here, but because you're black, we're going to admit you, even though an Asian kid worked harder and got better scores.
Somewhere along the line, someone said there's not enough of a particular race people here. Now, I again go back to this thing. I don't think it's racist, but I do agree with you in what you said earlier.
Okay.
And you're not talking about black and white. That's what I'm talking about. Okay. So if you're not smart enough to get into a certain place, then nothing is the affirmative action in that way is only going to cause more problems. For on a larger scale, not only the people who want to get into schools, not the parents of those people who want to get into schools, but when that gets out, you got a whole race of people or a whole group of people who now have a problem with that, and they create this fuss about it's not fair.
I have no problem with a school saying this is the set criteria for you to meet to be eligible for the school, right? I think we both agree. My problem is whether it's white, Asian, or black, when that criteria includes and this race. And that's what affirmative action is. Affirmative action isn't you need these test scores, you need these extracurriculars, you need this essay. It's you need all of these things, and you also need to be black. And let's add on top of it, you also can have lower scores if you're black because we expect less of you. And I just had a girl who sat down with me, a girl named Tina, and this is just, again, privileged white guy, but very sad where she was saying, well, I think I benefited from affirmative action. And she listed everything that she did. She came from Longview, went to a small school that didn't have a lot of AP programs. She did a lot of extracurriculars and wrote an essay. I said, well, that sounds to me like you earned your spot here at UT. You worked really hard. And she said, yeah, I'd like to think so. I said, do you not think that you deserve to be here? She said, well, I think so, but I also think it could be because of affirmative action. And I said, that's so sad. It's so sad that you can work so hard, and because other people maybe didn't work so hard but got in really based on tokenism, you rob that girl Tina of her self-confidence in earning her accomplishments. So I agree with you that universities should set out criteria. I just have a problem with that criteria specifically involving race, and I think it's had negative results. So what about the idea of just having more diversity into the school or into the system, right? That's another way to look at it. Is diversity?
We want to make a diverse program. We want to make a diverse university where it now doesn't look like just white, Asian, Latino. everybody now has access to get into this place, whether it's school, job, or what. Equal opportunity was the same thing in a sense.
Well,
you know what I mean?
No, because I don't have a problem with diversity occurring naturally based on the premise of equal opportunity. It sounds to me like what you're talking about is equal outcome. Let me ask you so I clarify, so I'm not misunderstanding. When you say diversity, what do you mean specifically?
Okay, if you have your school's 90% white, and the only people that can qualify to get into schools are people of that background. We need to do something.
But that's not. I want to be clear. That's not what happened. What's happening? Affirmative action is the opposite.
No. I'm trying to explain something.
Okay.
To
Now.
the
Okay.
point, right? So
apologies.
The university is all white. Let's just leave it at that. Make it simple. The university is all white.
Okay.
Someone says something in the system. Some group says the school is all white and they need to have more color in there. So the school implements some kind of system that says, let's reach out to the Spanish community, Black community, Asian community, right? And they do that. And then the most Asians are scoring, or they are qualifying to be in that place. Now the school is white, Asian. So how do we get more Latinos and how do we add more diversity to the program? So if
you're talking
those people
racial
are not
diversity.
if those people are not getting the qualifications or the scores that it takes to get into school, then something needs to be applied for that to happen. So the school meets the quota. Affirmative action sets that up.
Okay, so you support the idea of racial quotas to promote racial diversity.
Yeah, but I wouldn't call it.
I mean, I just want to make sure because you just said quotas.
Yeah, but I wouldn't call it racial.
Okay.
Because.
So what would you call specifically allowing a black person in with lower credentials because they're black, if not racial? What would you call that?
Offhand, man, I would just say it's offering an opportunity to someone who would never have the chance to do that kind of.
But they do have the chance by meeting the same criteria. So let me kind of present to you.
They don't come from a place where if they grow up in an environment that doesn't allow them, first of all, to grow with their environment, to move into, to be surrounded by the thing that gives them a certain kind of knowledge where they can learn these things to get into the schools. Right? We take tests sometimes. Coming as a black person in certain schools.
Well, you're still a black person, from what I understand.
We take tests to get in.
You didn't do a Rachel Dolezal, did you? You've always been black.
Right. So we take these tests to get into a certain place. If I fail the test, man, I got to go back.
Yeah.
But how do I learn how?
But that's the same thing that happens with white people.
But how do them too? How do people learn to take tests to qualify them to get into the place? If it's never going to happen, then we need to.
Well, it's already happening. So let me address kind of your point. So you were saying a school is entirely white. Okay. First off, I disagree with your premise of diversity for diversity's sake is a virtue. I don't think so. I think that intellectual diversity is more important. And by the way, that's much more lacking on campus than racial diversity, intellectual diversity. As a matter of fact, you have 40% of all university campuses with not a single Republican or conservative professor at all. 40%. You can't find 40% of any schools that don't have a single black professor. You can't find probably 5% that don't have a single black professor or a single lesbian professor. So intellectual diversity is more important to me. But to go to that point, you're presupposing that if a school is entirely white, which has never really been the case, by the way. Matter of fact, black enrollment in higher tier universities like Ivy League is lower now than 35 years ago, pre-affirmative action.
Agreed.
So affirmative action has had a net negative effect on black enrollment at higher education. So, okay, sorry, I interrupted, but how did you become a professor of hip hop? Were you a hip hop dancer?
Yeah, I started breaking in 1983 with Breaker, and I started breaking in 1983.
Okay.
And it was very new at the time. So super long story short, man, I just studied it and I performed in theater with the first hip hop dance company to put hip hop dance on concert stage, Rennie Harris, in Philadelphia. And from that point on, I found something that kept me engaged all the time. I could make music and dance, I could just set design, I could do all these things. And the stage was an empty canvas for me to do what I had been learning in Miss Funk's class.
Right.
And so understanding that from 1983 and studying it all the way up to when I started Princeton 2014, I just found myself in different places that gave me an advantage.
That's got to be. I gotta say, that's got to be a weird start at Princeton. Like, you know what we need here at Princeton? Hip hop.
Mind blowing, man.
Yeah.
So they called me and I said no a couple of times, and then something was like, dude.
You turned them down.
I did, because I didn't know. I don't have a degree.
Can you imagine the look on those white people's faces, Dean? Like, what the
Yo, but I didn't feel I had what it took to be in Princeton. Growing up, I heard Princeton, Harvard, yeah.
Right.
And now I'm here.
And even though you don't have a college degree, it was merit-based because of what you'd accomplished professionally.
Yeah.
So again, that's still merit-based. How upsetting would it be to you? For example, I would imagine that in hip-hop, right, specifically in the 80s, probably largely black, correct?
Black and Latino.
Black and Latino. You know, what if they came in and said, there are too many black hip-hop professors? We need to have more white hip-hop professors.
Okay.
And then you said, but that guy sucks.
Well,
and they're like, yeah, but you know what? There aren't enough of them, so we have lower expectations because we know white people can't dance.
But that doesn't even have anything to do with it. Now, what had happened was, because the schools have a certain standard, you can't go in without a degree. You can't teach at that level without a degree. So there were a lot of people who had degrees that could study or know someone that they could bring in to teach what they needed to teach.
Right.
So there were white people or people that didn't come from the background who were teaching those classes. And then eventually, I guess the schools just felt like we need to get some qualified people in here to do what they need to do. And a couple of them, Rennie Harris has a couple honorary degrees now from the university, so he doesn't have a degree either. But he's managed to do what needed to be done.
Well, maybe it's different because of the history of hip hop at Princeton. But let's say when you were touring, you said it was mostly black and Latino.
Yeah.
It would probably piss you off, I would imagine, if they just started hiring white guys to diversify who weren't good dancers. You probably would have said, man, that's not right.
Yeah.
Because someone else who's a better dancer is losing that spot.
True. But if you didn't do the work to get to that point, that's on you. You understand?
But I'm saying, if let's say there were an audition, okay, let's say you were there, and it seems like you're high level, so you probably were in on a lot of auditions.
I didn't play that game much. But
let's say,
to your question, you're right.
Yeah.
White people got more of the gigs than the blacks did. Example.
Because there weren't enough of them.
No, not even. They just fit the bill. Now I would go into a place that said the casting call would be a guy with a white beard, blue t-shirt, red sneakers, glasses, and a piercing. Exactly what I would be wearing, coincidentally.
Yeah.
And the person that got the job was completely opposite. White kid, blue eyes, blonde hair, looks like we can put him anywhere we need to put him. And so that is what becomes the visual, being able to identify hip hop with that thing.
And then you get that NSYNC.
That's what happens.
Yeah.
And it's still continuing to do that. So for
But
me,
I think we're finding common ground where we both agree. In that instance, the best dancer should be the one who gets the job. And even though it wasn't the case, and I'm saying the best student should be the one who gets into school.
I agree. So again, we go back to the beginning of this thing. I said it's not racist. And now I'm thinking maybe it could be,
a little bit.
But with more information, we put both these things on the table, and we're both. There's no right or wrong. It's just how can you prove which one you agree with.
Okay, well, so we both have something to think about.
Definitely, man. I'm definitely going to think about that even more.
You gonna show me a little the hip hop thing?
I'll show you.
All right, thanks, you man. Okay, wait, this is the thing. Hold on. All right, he's a professor of hip hop. What do I got to do? So you go like this.
That's it. Just go up and down.
Go up and down and up and down.
Everybody grab hands, right? We'll do like this big wave.
Yeah, everyone grab hands. Let's do the wave. Everyone grab hands. Come on now. We're gonna do the wave.
Let's do a giant wave.
There you go.
We'll start right here.
Okay. We grab hands? Is that okay?
You gotta connect it over there.
Johnny, come here. Man. Or Jeff, I got my security guy. Come on. My security guy will do the. All right. He's teaching me. Okay.
All right, look.
All right, look.
This is where it's going. There it is.
What?
There it is.
What?
All the way around.
Look at this.
How about that?
Look at this. All different races, genders, the power of dance.
That's called the affirmative wave right there.
Professor Raphael is. Thank you very much.
Watch Louder with Crowder live, Monday through Thursday, 10 a.m. Eastern.